Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we are on a fascinating journey to describe for you the intersection of elections and legislation. Joining me to help you to guide you along on this journey is John Horejsi. He is the founder and a coordinator at SALT, which is Social Action Linking Together. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You've been at this game a long time.
Very long.
So you founded SALT back in '83.
I did, in 1983.
Give us a little background about who some of those first people were and how you came together and what it's evolved to.
Well, I did a workshop on hunger, and anyway, in the course of the workshop, which was small, part of a larger conference, we discovered that Virginia was charging sales tax on food stamps, and that they were taking $8.5 million off the top that was going directly into the general fund instead of
back to the people who it was intended for.
Instead of food for hungry
Right.
children at risk of hunger. So we decided that this was the issue that we wanted to take on, and we went to Richmond, and they insisted that it was wrong, but they came back and we said, well, what did you do? And they said, well, we didn't get around to it. So I called Senator Kennedy's office and said, look, this is going on in Virginia. You should be concerned because you live in McLean. It's your adopted state. They said, yes, we are. They called me back 2 hours and they said, Virginia is just one of 18 states. We'll stop all of them. So we got it stopped. So that was kind of a grassroots movement, truly grassroots, because during the workshop, 8 people signed up to work on this, and when the word got out to the various social justice groups around this area, it shot from eight to 258. It was just success was so remarkable. So,
and that's grassroots organizing, as
Yeah.
you said. You brought a core group of people together. You defined what it is you wanted to do. You helped people understand what their superpowers are. And while it may have started as an interfaith group at the beginning, now it includes all kinds of people that are part of SALT. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you worked on this past year.
well, before I do that, I'd like to share with you that we kind of feel like we're Margaret Mead groupies. And her quote that is so famous is, if you want to change things, start with a small group, because she says, indeed, that's the only thing
That's ever changed anything.
That's changed anything. So we take that very serious, and so with that as
Your philosophy?
Yes.
You've worked on things for over a decade. You're still
Yeah,
working on
yeah.
things that you've been working on for over a decade. But you win a few, you lose a few, but you always come back.
Absolutely. It takes persistence. And just as with the food stamp issue, we moved on to trying to figure out why the legislators weren't more responsive, because they agreed that this was wrong, that charging families sales tax was wrong. So we decided the best way to hold them accountable, to make them take us serious in the future, would be we had what we called a Richmond wrap-up conference, and when they came back from session, we invited them to stand in front of us and tell us what they did during the session, what they worked on, and what their successes were. And they looked really bad when they found out we had to go to the federal level to get
Action on that.
action on the sales tax. So Senator Gartland came running to the microphone and he says, I can work with you guys on homelessness. And so we said, when are we going to meet? And he says, next week. And he was very serious, and we got a program through when families get in trouble and they're being evicted, a fund kicks in. It was called the Homeless Intervention Program, HIP. It had a nice acronym. And it was short-term assistance, and 90% of the families that were helped landed on their feet, didn't need any further assistance. They got in trouble because of a unexpected medical bill, or
car broke down,
or
loss.
lost job, this kind of thing. So the Virginia Commonwealth University had evaluated and found that 90% of the families landed on their feet. And so, of course, this was just a pilot. So then and they also determined that it cost 1/3 as much to keep a family in their own home as if they had to go into a shelter. So we said, well, this is good fiscal policy for you to expand this program, because it saves money, and we know you want to save money. So we got it expanded through the whole state. So that's a kind of persistence that makes a difference. It's, you have a voice and you have to use it. And as Margaret Mead says, if you talk to your legislator individually by yourself, you're not going to have that much progress. But when you come in and meet with a legislator with constituents and a small group, then the legislator listens.
So I guess we should point out to people too who, and I'm surprised that there are a number of people who just have never been to Richmond to lobby, or people who've been to Richmond but they've never set foot in the Capitol,
Yeah.
They've never visited their legislator, their senator, or their delegate, because they've just never thought that they could. So coming up with lobby days, or having somebody like SALT organize a small group, kind of makes it easier for someone who's never done it to show up and talk to their elected representative.
Absolutely. We...
Right. I mean, you take everybody down once a year. You've got your legislative agenda. You had one, and we'll talk a little bit about what you did last year, and you had some successes last year. And then moving forward, there are things that are in the 2020 legislative agenda. But how that intersects with elections is, if people don't vote on November 5th this year, they don't have a say in who goes back or whether somebody new goes back. So it's very critical for people to understand that you have to vote on November 5th before you can start focusing on what we expect to do in 2020's legislative session.
What's important to understand is that when you meet with the legislator, you need that the legislators are citizen legislators, and they don't have a large staff to become aware of the needs and to find out what their positions ought to be and this kind of thing. So they depend on their constituents, and it's important to be informed, not to give misinformation, but at the same time to meet with your legislator. And the biggest gift you can give to the legislator is to meet with him once and then go away and not come back.
Yeah,
and
right.
he can agree with you, and he can get off the hook, and he can deal with the other 2,000 bills that they have. But the important thing is that you follow up, and you make the ask them if they agree with you. Will they consider patroning the bill, or will they ask other legislators to support it? Or in other words, will they take some ownership and show some leadership? That's what we failed to do in the food stamps. We didn't understand. We were naive. And the other thing I wanted to say was that in the workshop, when we decided that the sales tax was the issue that we wanted to work on, what we did was, I forgot again.
So you had a small group in a workshop. Yeah. You decided...
people in the workshop said, you can't do that. You're just going to turn off the legislators. But when we got to Richmond, we were warmly welcomed. They said, this was a Catholic Charities workshop, so they said, where have you Catholics been? The other faiths have been here, and we're so glad to see you. And this became something helped build our confidence and made us aware or feel more certain that what we were doing was something that would help people who are not frequently at the policy-making table, who are forgotten and overlooked. And so we wanted to be their champion, and this was something, there was a lot of compassion in this little group, so this gave us an opportunity to act on our compassion and to get something done. And the result that we got with the sales tax being lifted in 18 states was
phenomenal for such a small group, starting with 8 and going to 258.
Yes.
But you know what's interesting about that too, though, is that it's about constituency, right?
Yes.
So lobbying groups might push back. There might be attorneys who act as lobbyists, and they get, we hear about how the NRA, pays all this money for lobbyists to go in and lobby these legislators. But all the money in the world can't keep those people in office. Constituents have the vote. Only the vote keeps incumbent legislators or elects legislators to office. And I think, especially in an off-year election, a lot of our viewers may not be thinking that their vote matters. But it matters more this year than any other year because more offices are being elected this year, Senate and delegate. But boards of supervisors, school board, sheriff, Commonwealth's attorney. We're going to talk later about criminal justice reform. Are we really going to allow 30% of Virginians to decide who our top prosecutor is going to be in every county? I hope that our viewers really understand that their superpower is their vote, to choose the person who goes into office, and then after that to leverage their constituency to say, this is what I care about, this is what I want you to care about, and this is what I want you to respond to.
It certainly means a lot to the legislators, because the thing we were most consistently told, and we still hear from legislators, is their message is, we're so glad you're here, because you're the only group, one of the few groups that comes to speak to us that isn't asking for something for yourself.
There you go.
Yeah,
so when we come back from our break, we are going to be talking further with John Horejsi. He is a founder and a coordinator for SALT, Social Action Linking Together. And we're going to be talking about the importance of your vote on next year's legislative agenda. So join us after.
So I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with John Horejsi. He is a founder of and a coordinator with SALT, Social Action Linking Together. And tonight's show is really focusing attention on why your vote matters to next year's legislative session. Legislation will either be passed or not be passed based on who returns to Richmond in January. So John, tell me a little bit about some of the groups that you work with, on some of these issues. You've been at it, like I said, 36 years.
Yeah. Well, so, important is getting into coalitions sometimes. So you don't necessarily adopt the entire agenda of your partners, but you agree to work on a particular issue. And the one that the last couple of years we got into coalition with the Interfaith Alliance for Human Resources and several other groups, mental health groups, this kind of thing, is solitary confinement. We learned that in prison that people are being put in solitary confinement for trivial reasons. They ask for a grievance form because of something a guard said or did, and they find themselves in solitary confinement. And that this is torture. Anything beyond 15 days, according to the mental health community, is torture. Torture
yes.
And destructive of their mental health. They deteriorate after 15 years very rapidly, both their physical and their mental health. So we were fighting for a bill to eliminate solitary confinement for the mentally ill. They have to be evaluated within 72 hours after they go in, and if they're mentally ill, they cannot be kept in unless there's some really, really extreme conditions where they're going to harm themselves or somebody else. But then we wanted limited for the
the general population.
Yeah, for the general population to 15 days. Well, the corrections fought us tooth and nail, who wouldn't go for it. So we came back with a bill because we keep hearing, they keep saying, well, we don't do solitary confinement. Well, they just changed the name to segregated housing or something, or they put them in under other conditions, other names in another section of the prison. And so the interfaith action for human resources are very good about getting information from, for example, one of the members of our coalition communicates with over 100 prisoners regularly, and we get all this contradictory information about the fact that they are being kept in. We asked to visit Red Onion, where they have solitary confinement. At the last minute, they wouldn't let us go, but the legislators that were going to go with us, they allowed them. So I asked Patrick Hope what he found. He says, I found one guy that's in solitary confinement for 14 years. Can you imagine that? So anyway, since they killed our bill, they wouldn't play. We put in another bill, which is a data collection and reporting bill. They have to report who goes in, how long, why, and so they fought us on that, but they were in a position where they had to compromise.
Right.
And we had to compromise on some of the things, and it turned out some of the things we compromised on were even better than what were in our bill, so we got a pretty good reporting bill through the session this year. So we now know that when we get when we have the reporting and it's in code, it's in law, they have to do it or they're in trouble, then we can go back with the original bill that we wanted. And so that's been really exciting. We're looking forward. We're working now on a bill for next year. We got a bill from New Jersey, which is an excellent bill. It has everything we want, and the House and the Senate passed it there, but the Governor Christie vetoed it, but they have a new governor who just signed it, so we're going in with that new bill.
Yeah, again, the importance of elections, right?
Yeah,
if you don't like your governor, elect a new one.
And the importance of showing up. I mean,
absolutely.
You can be concerned, but if you don't tell your legislator, how is he supposed to know what you want him to do? You know, they work for us, as you said. We elect them, and so you know, and they are citizen legislators. They depend on us for information. So anyway.
So this is very interesting. So let's just take this bill. First of all, a lot of times when you can't get the bill you want, they do a study. That's routinely a compromise. It's kind of like, we're not going to pass your bill, but we can't just ignore you completely,
Right.
so we're going to study it.
Yes.
In the past, they do that regularly.
We call it incremental.
Incremental. But let's use this as an example of, during this election season, people need to be asking in forums how their legislator, if there is an incumbent, there's some open seats, but you know, I would ask David Bulova, if it came to a floor vote, how did you vote for that bill? Did you vote to eliminate solitary confinement? If there's a town hall, people need to step up to the microphone or raise their hand and say, excuse me, I just would like to know, how did you vote on that bill about eliminating solitary confinement?
It's called accountability.
Accountability. And any ordinary person can ask their legislator about whether or not they supported a bill. And it is a great way to hold legislators accountable.
Well, what's really great about that, if they answer in the affirmative that they support it, then
you can hold their feet to the fire.
You can hold their feet to the fire, yes, and that's important, yes.
Because some legislators, you know, to your point, some of them don't know. Like, I've been in town halls where I've asked questions about specific bills and surprised my legislator, who was not as informed possibly as he could have been. But then what happens generally is that I follow up with more information about my interest in that bill and say, this is why I want you to vote this way. Yeah. And then the following year, my legislator is more informed, and he knows that he has a passionate, invested constituent moving that bill forward.
And for example, what happened to me at the town hall, I spoke up about the solitary confinement, and they asked the two legislators that were who were holding the town meeting whether they would support it. And then when I got back to my chair, somebody handed me a note and said, I'm with the mental health community. We want to help you guys.
Right.
So that's a good way to get partners, get the word out what you're doing. And again, as I said in the earlier segment, it's so important to do it in community with others, because, you know, it's like when you're just an individual, it's like if you were a match and I squashed it down, it would squash. But if I had several matches, it was much harder. So what is important is a number of voices that they hear from more people, yes. Yeah.
And we should mention too, even the lone voices, and they have small staffs, and we should also mention that our legislators actually have thousands of bills that they must review in 45 days or 60 days. It alternates even in odd years.
Exactly.
But that's it, 60 days or 45 days, thousands of bills. And therefore, if citizens don't step up and go and educate the staff, and a lot of times it isn't a legislative assistant that you're talking to.
Yes.
But they keep track of every person who shows up, every email they receive from a constituent, every phone call where the caller identifies a specific bill. So they know, just by tracking your one letter that you mail in, they know how their constituents are feeling about a particular bill.
I walked into a legislator's office once, and the aide says, "Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. Your bill's coming up," and the legislator asked me for a detailed report on it. And I said, well, here's a fact sheet.
That's right, the fact sheet, the leave behind, something that you leave behind.
They were just so thrilled to get that. And from that I learned, I watched her set up a folder, and you know, when the legislator comes in, he said, I'm going to committee meeting, give me the folder on this bill, that, you know.
That's the information in there.
And he studies it as he goes on the elevator, you know. And so anyway, that's an example of how important it is that they hear from you, because if he opens that folder and nobody's you're in trouble.
Up, right.
Yeah.
And he's like, none of my constituents care about this. So,
and you know, with, as you said, thousands of bills, he's interested in screening out so he can get to the ones that are most important to him. Right. He doesn't want to hear about these other ones.
And there's a lot. And so there's subcommittees. We should talk a little bit about the structure. You know, bills originate in the House, or they originate in the Senate, or there are companion bills that are in both chambers.
Yes.
But they have to get through subcommittee, committee, and often appropriations before they cross over. So oftentimes the bills are killed in their infancy, early on in the piece. And so describe a little bit about some of the strategies used for killing some of your bills before they ever get to the floor.
Well, if in particular the Public Safety and Prisons Committee sets up a whole series of subcommittees, and everybody knows that when the bill goes to subcommittee, it's being sent there to be killed. And what happens is the majority party has 3 out of 5 votes, or
Right.
4 out of 5, and they know that they don't want the bill, so they kill it, or they meet when the those who oppose
And the minority party,
yeah,
right?
The minority party is in a committee meeting and won't be there to vote. But what happened with us when the Democrats were in, of course, even if it was defeated in subcommittee, it had to go to the full committee. But now, under the new majority, when it's killed in subcommittee, it's dead. It's, you know, so. What happened was we found out they were shackling women who were sometimes pregnant in
during
prison,
delivery.
during delivery, women in prison. And it was the bill to stop that because it's inhumane and it's dangerous for the woman's health and the fetus.
The babies,
yeah, you know, she's out of balance anyway, and then she's got shackles, my God. So anyway, they killed it, and because they didn't have a recorded vote and we couldn't see their lips, we didn't know who killed it and who voted for it. So I had my advocates call all the members of the subcommittee and tell them how disappointed we were. And then I get this call from one of the legislators that he says, "Call off your people. We have so many calls on this." I supported it. No, we don't need any more calls because we can't get our work done. So, you know, the response to that.
Yeah, we told you were applying pressure at exactly the right point.
Yeah. So, anyway, I went to the patron and I said, "What are we going to do?" You know, they defeated it. And he said, "Let's go see the director of corrections." And he came in and says, "How can I help you?" And he had his whole top entourage with him. Oh,
we're going to hold that thought.
Okay.
When we come back, we're going to be talking with John Horejsi from SALT further about some of the ways he has found workarounds to get legislation passed, because often it does take a team, and politics is a team sport. So join us after the break, figure out how you can be part of our team.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right?
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking about the intersection of legislation and elections tonight with John Horejsi of SALT, who certainly knows that intersection very well, having worked for 36 years to get legislation passed with a coalition across the Commonwealth of Virginia for issues that matter to a great many of us, certainly a great many of us watching. So you were talking a little bit about when you were trying to work on getting women out of shackles who were pregnant, you ended up finding in labor.
Going to the hospital.
You found a partner outside the legislature.
Yes, a number of partners came together on this, and we met with the Director of Corrections because legislatively it didn't look like a go. And the Director of Corrections said, "How can I help you?" And we said, "Well, we understand you're shackling women when they're in labor." And he said, No, it would never happen here. I had gotten documentation from Guest House in Alexandria of 5 women that had been shackled. So we said, "Well, we've documented 5. And he says, "Oh, well, I'm new here. I don't know what went on before, but there's no way I would condone that." And we said, "Well, you'll support our legislation?" And he says, "Absolutely." But he said, "I have a better idea. We'll draft some regulations and take them to the Corrections Policy Board." Well, we had no idea that such a thing existed. He called us in to review the regulations. We made some changes and took it to the policy board and passed unanimously. So I think what's important to understand when you're an advocate and you work with legislators, legislative advocacy, sometimes you have to find a workaround. And we were good at that with the sales tax on food stamp. We went to the federal level. And the chairman of the subcommittee that killed the bill for women, shackling bill, was there at the Corrections Policy Board meeting, taking credit for having eliminated it. So
okay, that
go
makes
figure.
No sense at all.
But
that makes no sense at all.
But we were happy because it was a success. I mean, it was a monumental success. And I just saw the other day in federal law, they're putting in a bill in all the federal prisons to outlaw shackling. So we were ahead of the curve.
See,
so
look at that. It's nice to be a leader. It's nice to be a leader
we
sometimes. We
stumbled into it, of course.
I think that's great. But
Yeah.
you've got some other things around criminal justice reform that you hope to do.
Yes.
You and I had been talking about, what I call convict labor, which has a history that goes all the way back to Reconstruction, post-Civil War, when newly freed, particularly newly freed black men, were rounded up, put in prison, and sent back to plantations to build bridges, to work in mines. They literally worked them to death as convict labor. And here, in the 21st century, in 2019, we basically have a whole system of convict labor that is much the same. One of my favorite examples of that is during the California wildfires. Inmates were out there fighting those wildfires next to professional firefighters for $2 a day. To me, that sounds like Reconstruction era convict labor. So what is your big idea? What is your mission? What is your goal this year for trying to raise what inmates are paid, and why?
Okay, well, as you had indicated, we have identified in the prison system legitimate jobs that they would have to hire people to do, and they have prisoners doing these jobs, and they get like $2 a week for 40 hours. I guess we're learning that, there's a variation, maybe 49 cents for some jobs, and I saw one where it was $10 a week. And basically, we're looking at it, but it looks like it's about 29 cents an hour. And the prisoners are also being charged with child support and
unpaid fees and
fines and this kind of thing. And if we want to prepare them to go back in the community and be responsible, they should be paid a decent wage, and it should be applied to their child support and their fees and this kind of thing. And so we're very seriously working on it. In fact, I have 2 legislators who already said they want to patron the bill, and that's the most important first step, because I have learned that if you ask a legislator to put in and he's just doing it for you, he doesn't take ownership. When it gets to committee, one of the first questions the committee will ask him, is this for you or is this for one of your constituents? He'll say it's for one of my constituents, and they'll kill it right away. So anyway, that's one thing I learned.
There you go, and that's a good tip to share with everyone.
So I'm proud to say that I have legislators who are just enthusiastic about putting this bill in and working with us on it and helping us gather information and build support for it. And it's important to have a person like that, because they will bring along other legislators. I've learned too, sometimes when a legislator wants a bill real bad and other legislators don't know much about it, but they feel if this person can vote for it, I'm in step with him and I'll vote for it. So, but it's important to have a legislator that will work with us on drafting an acceptable bill that he thinks he can get through and that he can speak to and bring the advocates in to speak. But then we educate and advocate. We educate the legislator as best we can, and then when he agrees to do it, then we go out and advocate with the other legislators, and we focus on the committee first, the committee members, the committee that he's going to take his bill. But we usually try to find a legislator who's already on the committee that's going to hear the bill, because
that's very important.
Yeah,
very important.
Those are all little things that we've learned. Yes,
we'll see. And you've got kind of a mission thing that people would be well served to figure out the things you figured out. But let's talk a little bit about, criminal justice reform is something everyone's talking about, because we realize that it just can't continue the way it is. It's impacting families, it's impacting communities, it's impacting economies.
And it's expensive.
It is. Incarceration is terribly expensive.
$30,000 a year.
So you're, something as basic as paying people doing work that you'd otherwise have to pay someone else a market rate wage for. But they also have expenses in prison, and I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Canteen, they get a little bag of potato chips for $5, and they're hungry. They're not getting enough food, and then if they earn 29 cents an hour, they have to work forever just to get in the canteen to get some potato chips,
Right, and then there's things like the phone calls, how expensive phone calls are from jail and prison, and to see a doctor. I think there's actually a fee to see a doctor. Yes,
they have to pay a $5 copay, and again, for somebody working 29 cents an hour, they have to work about 15 hours to pay the copay, and if they don't have the $5 or they can't pay it, even if they have it, they don't go to get medical treatment, then
it just gets worse.
Well, what it does, it means a person is sick, and it spreads through the prison. That's our biggest concern, is the health of prisoners, and charging a $5 copay that they can't pay is an impediment to needed health care.
To keep the population in the prison healthy.
Yes.
I know that
as well as that individual prisoner.
Hepatitis C is rampant, and there's a lot of reasons that it's rampant. But again, prisoners are being nickeled and dimed to death. If they're indigent, they get nothing. I mean, they count so much on families putting money into prisoners' accounts.
And generally, these families are very poor.
Right.
Or if the prisoner has done wrong, the family has written them off and won't have anything to do with it. Would never even answer their call, much less contribute money, you know.
So they're considered indigent, and so they are denied really basic services. You know, all of this we need to look at, and again, I would remind people that, you know, that your senator and your delegate are up for election, but also the Commonwealth's attorney. We have a lot of new people running this year to be the top prosecutor in our counties, and a lot of stopping over incarceration starts with whether or not you prosecute certain cases and certain people.
We met with Brian Moran, the Secretary for Public Safety, about 3 weeks ago, and his mental health top official was part of the meeting, and she said 10 years ago, 11% of the population was mentally ill. She said now it's 30%. And so, you know, the need for services are staggering.
It is, but that's why we need a mental health docket, again, not channel people into jails and prisons who are mentally ill.
They should go to treatment, not to jail.
Correct.
And she said, quite frankly, they're not equipped to handle it.
Right. So people need to understand that you're getting out and voting this year because you are voting for your sheriff, and your sheriff runs the local jails, and you are voting for a Commonwealth's attorney, and that person decides which of these cases deserves to go to a drug docket, a mental health docket, a veterans docket, and look at treatment and not incarceration. That all of these, your board of supervisors, all of these positions matter, and this is the year.
Yes. And I'd just like to say this has to be overwhelming for anybody listening to the program or contemplating, but when you get hooked up with a group like SALT, all the fact sheets are developed, the messages that you need to send to your legislator are developed. All you have to do is go to our website and click. With one click, you can send it to all the members of the committee and this kind of thing. So we make it easy. But we need you. We need everybody out there because that's what the legislators listen to more than us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is strength in numbers. I like your matchstick analogy. It's easy for someone to pat you on the head and say, yes, 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 I agree with you. But when a group of people show up in a legislator's office and say, this is our talking points, this is our case, and this is who is in our coalition, to your point, when you have people in the Department of Corrections saying mental health is an issue in our prisons, we need to figure out a better way. Then you've got a coalition partner right there.
Yes, absolutely.
So when we come back,
the most important,
the most important, right? The Department of Corrections. And you've made an excellent point about the fact that getting in touch with people like Brian Moran, talking with his staff, has made a huge impact. So when we come back from our break, we are going to continue talking with John Horejsi. He is the founder and a coordinator for Social Action Linking Together. And our subject is legislation and election. Join us after the break.
Can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window. Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball. This is really bad. What are we gonna do? We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious? It's my ball, Myrtlebeck. You're so dead. I'd run away. Yeah, to Uruguay. Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry. Let's go. See you, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well. Nice one. Some friends you are. Hi. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. One and some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again. But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is John Horejsi of SALT, Social Action Linking Together, and we're talking about where elections meet legislation and how the two intersect. So John, one of the things that we haven't talked about tonight, which I know is top of your list, is about TANF.
Yes.
Explain a little bit about what TANF benefits are, the history of it, where we are, and where you hope to be.
Well, TANF is essentially welfare for the vulnerable families. Frequently families are in crisis and need help. Generally, the focus of TANF is to be temporary assistance, short term,
right.
And it used to be a federal program in which the state matched the federal money to help families, but with welfare reform, it has devolved from the state level to from the federal level to the state level. The states have more flexibility and more control, and it has two goals. One is to provide care for children in their own homes in spite of the fact that the family is too poor to provide for them, so they have to be very poor. That's the first thing. And then secondly, to help the family to acquire work skills and to become employed and self-sufficient. And they have the bill that evolved from the federal level put a 5-year limit on it. But what people don't understand, the law says up to 5 years. So a lot of states have only 3 years of assistance or 2 years. And what Virginia decided to do is to break it up. They can get help for 2 years, and then they have to be off for 2 years, and they can come back if they still need. And basically, we put in legislation because the benefits are so low in Virginia. Virginia is #1 for business, but it's way at the bottom for children. And our support for families is way, the TANF benefit level is at 20%. Can you imagine, 20% of the poverty level?
Yeah.
And before the program devolved to the state, about 78 families out of 100 poor families got assistance. Under the new welfare, the state program, only about 28 instead of 78 are getting help. So the caseload has decreased tremendously, but the amount of federal money going into it has stayed constant. So because 40% of the families, the parent lacks education or has learning disabilities or other problems with drugs and this kind of thing, they need more time than
that 2-year limit.
Than that 2-year limit. If they get set up in daycare and into a
training program,
or that kind of thing where they'll have credentials so they can get a decent job so they can afford to stay off. The 2 years is up. I mean, if you can't get into the credential program till next fall,
right,
and you have to have daycare and this kind of thing, then right in the middle of the program you're cut off. Well, it's counterproductive. It makes no sense. And very few states have it broken up like that. So we're trying to get it to be a continuous. Virginia has 5 years, but it's broken up. So we're trying to convince them to see the need to have a continuous 5 years, because the more support they get, we find, the sooner they get off, the better they do, the less frequent do they come back on. There's everything, that we're striving for has better outcomes if they get a decent opportunity. They get the time they need. Unfortunately, Virginia has gone with a 90 days in which they're expected to get employment, and they have to take the first low-paying job, and they're pushed off. So the caseload has gone down, but poverty has gone up.
Poverty has gone up, evictions have gone up.
Yes.
We have one of the highest eviction rates in the nation is Virginia.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that's not tied to how we're doing TANF.
Exactly.
The other thing is felons.
Yeah.
Felons are not eligible for TANF.
Right.
Look at our mass incarceration problem. Look at what is a felony charge. We have such a low threshold for felony.
Yes. And I looked at the DOJ website that says 75% or 70% of the prisoners have children. And so I was astonished to find that 50% of the TANF cases are what they call child only. I said, what the hell's that? And they said, that's because the children are living with relatives. And so we figured out those kids are living with grandparents, grandparents raising grandchildren. That's what we're doing to them. We're giving them these low benefits. You know, a foster child, two of them, a young child and a middle-aged,
school-age child.
School-aged child, they get about $1,300 a month of foster care. In TANF, they get $200, you know.
200.
Or 250.
As opposed to 1,300 for a foster child.
So anyway, I got Senator Favola to put in a bill to say, you know, because these relative
it's an additional
the relative
expense
care
for
expense, they're poor. They make sacrifices to take them in, and it gets to the point where they can't take care of them anymore, and they're dumping them into the foster care. So I said to Senator Favola, if these relatives are willing to go through the foster care training and agree to a permanent arrangement for these kids, they can get the foster care rate. She got it through. So that's hugely big.
That
hugely
is huge.
big.
It is
and
huge.
I think it'll come from the TANF money instead of from foster care. So anyway, it's just so uplifting to work on these things and to have a success like that, you know, because it is for families, and you know, these kids are our future. And I just read recently where every dollar we spend on children, we get more return than any other dollars that the General Assembly spends. You know, the return on that in their lifetime is awesome. You know, it's really, really big.
But we have amazing disparities in Virginia. I mean, there's disparities. The income gap, the wealth gap has grown in the country nationwide. But in Virginia,
inequality,
there's the inequality, but the gap between
and
those
poverty
is huge. And so it seems to me that taking a look at some of these programs and how they can be deployed more effectively makes a lot of sense.
Well, you know, the work first concept of pushing them into the first job, just they're poor on welfare because they're at 20% of the poverty level, but then they're poor, working poor. They're still poor, and the goal of the program is for them to get off and be self-sufficient and not be poor anymore, working poor. So
but,
they should be helped to, be able to access better paying jobs. And sometimes that takes a little longer, but we ought to make that investment. That's what we're saying.
But the minimum wage is also a problem too.
Absolutely.
Because the minimum wage, how long did you say we've been at
10 years.
10 years at $7.25. So even if you've got a minimum wage job, even if you work 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, you can't live in a place like
Northern Virginia. A lot of families do work 3 jobs.
I know, and they can't, and their families crammed together in houses. So that they can afford, especially in Northern Virginia. I think, you talk a little bit with TANF about the groups and how they've got these groups that don't make sense either, as far as trying to tie benefits to regions.
Yeah, that's to consolidate the groups, knowing that the benefits are so low. What we don't realize in this area, the benefits are a lot higher than in the rural areas. staggeringly higher. So I went into Senator Stanley's office. I know him because
Bill Stanley,
yeah.
yes.
And I said, you know, you ought to be concerned that the benefits are so low. They're lower than Alabama and Mississippi in your areas. And he said, what we got to do about it? I said, well, just lift them up into the upper group, consolidate it. He said, go out and write a budget amendment, and he got it through. So we moved the lowest, about 100 counties, up into the middle group, so they get the same amount that Richmond and the middle group. So we're now trying to raise the middle group, of which the lowest was up into the top tier, which is appropriate because even at the top tier, it's you know, below subsistence.
It's below, you can't survive on it anyway.
If it was really at a decent level, I could see the reason for a differential, but there's just no basis for it with such low benefits. They all need to be the same because, you know, rent and food and surviving costs.
But for felons getting out, it's a triple whammy.
Yeah.
We have so many people returning. You mentioned Friends of Guest House earlier, which is the
Amazing.
largest. They are wonderful, but they're the largest program for women returning.
And it's only about 29.
29 women, the largest in Virginia. What does that tell you about the dearth of reentry programs and support for people coming back?
Well, see, this is what we've been pushing on the Department of Social Services. We're saying the thing you're not doing under TANF is you're not including the father who's in prison as part of the family. And when he gets out, he can't go back to the family because if she is getting assistance for 2 kids and he comes back and they can't increase, he doesn't qualify, then she's got that assistance for 3, has to cover 4 individuals, 4 people. And so what we're trying to say is, you know, the extra $69 that goes to the family would be, you know, it would just be a little boost for him to
reunite with his family,
reunite the family, but it helps with the reentry problem because it helps him to take responsibility for the family. Just the father being there, it means so much to those kids and makes such a difference, and it helps them to
be stable. To be stable.
Yeah.
But again, you know, even felons getting access to housing because so many...
And food stamps.
And food stamps, but housing because you can't get a lease if you have, you know, all of these things have really impacted
Well, we're looking
Virginia.
at another thing. Okay.
You're doing a lot of other things. And I want to say thank you for all the things you're looking at.
Thank you.
And encourage everybody at home to get involved with SALT, Social Action Linking Together. There are so many ways that you can be part of this amazing coalition that wants to impact the quality of life for all Virginians here in Northern Virginia and across the rest of the Commonwealth. Thanks for joining us here on Inside Scoop.